Hello everyone and welcome back to our mini Alireza saga. We are trying to get Alireza to 2800 and he has the opportunity to do so in this game. The problem is his opponent is Alexander Grischuk and he's playing with the black pieces. Now, if you want to be 2800, that's something that you're going to have to do, but it's, playing it at this level, at this consistency is not an easy feat. Out of the 7 games that Alireza already played in this tournament, he won 6 and drew 1, only one draw against Ivan Šarić. So winning against the Grischuk here with the black pieces would be, well, it would be worthy of gaining a 2800 rating. So without further ado, let's check it out and see what Sasha has to say about this. So Grischuk with the white pieces opens with e4. We have e5 by Alireza, knight f3, knight to c6, and bishop to b5. Going for the Ruy Lopez, we have a6, Morphy's defense, bishop to a4, and now knight to f6. And for those of you who maybe do not know, Grischuk is also a former member of the 2800 club himself. We have castles and the b5 now challenging this bishop here, so it's a very standard line of the Ruy Lopez, the Columbus variation, bishop to b3 and bishop to c5, preparing to castle kingside. We have c3, preparing d4, and now d6. We have d4 striking in the center, and the bishop back to b6, and now bishop to e3. So like I said, we've had this many times on the board. We have castles, and now knight b to d2, and here the usual moves the black plays here are h6 and the bishop to g4. Some other moves are played a little bit less, but here Alireza goes for rook to b8. It's a very rare move, and it's obviously aimed at confusing Sasha here. So let's see how he deals with this. But it's not a new move. We have h3. Sasha says, "All right, I'm gonna take away the g4 square from your pieces." And now there are some games where h6 was played, but here we have rook to e8, and it is now already, as of move 11, that we have a completely new game. So Alireza throws Grischuk out of book, and he wants to see how he will deal with this new situation. So rook to e1, also another standard move. We have bishop to b7. Now Alireza's bishop pair is very nicely placed. If the position opens up, the duo could be very deadly. And now knight to g5, asking Alireza, what are you going to do with, about this f7 pawn? Yes, your rook is very nice on e8, but the f7 pawn is now weak. And he's probably checking if Alireza wants to go for d5, but the d5 is maybe just, trading everything out of the opening, basically. If you play d5, we can play e captures on d5, and now we can't capture the pawn. If we capture the pawn, the problem is queen h5 and it's game over. White wins, so there's that. So after this captures on d5, you would have to play knight to a5. Now you have plenty of pieces attacking that d5 pawn, and now we would just see something like d captures on e5, knight captures on b3, a nice capture fest here. Knight captures, for example, rook captures on e5, bishop captures on b6. We're going to play rook captures on e1 with check first, queen captures, c captures on b6, and now we're going to play queen to e5 at a defender to this pawn, and you can't really capture it even though you're attacking it 3 times, because rook to d1 could be a bit of a problem for black. So this is just trading everything, and you really haven't achieved all that much. I mean, okay, you do have a passed d pawn, but maybe you can do better. So instead of this, after knight to g5, we have rook to e7. Alireza just defends here, and now comes d5. Now Sasha grabs the d5 square. We have bishop captures on e3, and now rook captures on e3. This is a must move. If you go for captures on c6 first, then we're going to capture on d2, and after queen captures, we're going to play bishop captures on c6, and well, you're just down a pawn, so we can't have that. So after bishop captures on e3, we have rook captures on e3, and now knight to a7. Now you're going to shift the knight to c8, and then you can go to b6, and that's how Alireza wants to do it. Even though it seems more natural to bring the knight on a5 to pressure the bishop than push the c pawn, as we've seen in the Ruy Lopez many times before. But okay, now Grischuk goes for a6, puts pressure on the b5 pawn, and knight to c8. Alireza just continues his plan with a captures on b5, a captures on b5, and now c4. Played like a computer, just putting pressure on black's position and basically threatening to win a pawn with c captures on b5. And Grischuk did spend a little bit more time than Alireza here. He's down to 40 minutes on the clock. Alireza has some 1 hour and 5 minutes on the clock, well, it's move 18, so plenty of moves left to reach time control. And basically, you have to decide how do you want to go about this. Do you want to just capture on c4, which of course you can always do, or do you want to maybe throw in an h6, first dislodge the knight from this active square, and then maybe play some like b captures on c4, or you want to defend your pawn with c6. So those are options. They all have their good sides and bad sides. None of them really has any bad sides. They're all good moves. But Alireza goes for c6. So he puts pressure on the d5 pawn and defends the b5 pawn. Grischuk now captures on c6. We have bishop captures on c6, and now c captures on b5. And now this is, well, it's not maybe a critical position, but it's a very interesting one because the absolute best move for black here is just bishop back to e8 to add more defense to the f7 pawn, because you can see that white still has this annoying pressure on f7. So maybe including h6 at some point did make sense, but it's a very, very complicated position. But Alireza didn't go for this. He just captured here right away. It's better to just move the bishop and allow the rook to capture. But now Grischuk has this very, very annoying move, bishop captures on f7. And the thing is, the queen is now coming to b3 to add more pressure on this diagonal, and this is going to be a problem for black, as you'll see. So rook captures on f7, we have to play this. Now comes queen to b3, now threatening to pick up the rook. So d5, blocking the queen's diagonal, and now we capture on f7, attacking black's queen. King captures, and now e captures on d5. So we're threatening to, do all sorts of nasty discoveries here. But now queen captures on d5, offering a queen trade, and here Grischuk took the queen. He played queen captures on d5, although worth considering was queen to c3. This is really a fine idea, threatening that queen to c7 check to pick up the rook on b8, and you would have to be very careful here. Basically, you have to part with the d5 pawn. You have to move the king, and then, for example, rook captures on e5, we attack the queen, put some more pressure along the fifth rank, and after, let's say, something like queen to b7, we're going to play rook 8 to e1, and white really gains a lot of momentum here. Yes, black still has 2 pieces for the rook, but it's 4 pawns against 2, so white would have some pressure here. But okay, Sasha decides against this. He decides to trade queens. Queen captures on d5 with check, knight captures on d5, attacking the rook, and now rook captures on e5. We have knight back to f6, and now knight to e4, offering another trade of knights. So Alireza declines this. He plays knight to d7, attacks the rook, rook to d5, and now bishop to c6, putting pressure on the rook. Also, the knight has to be defended, but now we play rook to d2. The knight is defended by not defending the knight. If Alireza captures here, we're going to capture this knight. So here, knight to e5, getting rid of this threat, and here, rook to e1. Again, maybe worth considering was knight to g5. It's a really tricky move because the h7 pawn is also attacked, and you can't really go king to g8 because rook to d8 will be checkmate after the bishop blocks, so this is just checkmate. So we can't play that. We're going to have to go to g6 to defend our pawn, and now we can play this very nice f4 move. Defend our knight, attack the black knight, and after the knight moves somewhere, let's say here, we attack the rook, and there's a double attack on the b2 pawn now. We play rook d4, attack the knight here, and after we move the knight, you have to bring the knight back to help out with the defense. For example, here we play rook to a6, and now this could be an issue for black. It's a very nice attack for white, so maybe something along these lines would have been good for white. Now you don't really have a good way of dealing with this. You have to play something like h6. Let's say rook captures on c6, h captures on g5. Now we're going to have f captures on g5, rook captures on b2, and now for example, rook to d5, and white has all the pressure in the world here. Black can't really do anything with the knights. It would be very hard to play this. But okay, after knight to e5, Grischuk went rook to e1. And now we have bishop captures on e4. So he wants to minimize the number of pieces on the board. Rook captures on e4. And now not rook to b5 to defend the knight, although this does activate the pieces a little bit more. But again, going back, knight to c6. And here the situation on the clock is 11 minutes for Grischuk and some 21 minutes for Alireza. So rook to d3. trying to trick Alireza for going after the b2 pawn. Of course, if this is captured, then it's just game over. Rook f3 check. You can see that the rooks are controlling both the e and the f file, and now if you go back, then it's just checkmate, rook to e8 checkmate, so you're going to have to go to g6, but still rook to e6 check, and the knight here is lost. So of course the pawn cannot be captured. We have knight 8 to e7, and now b3. So now the pawn on b3 is nicely protected, and it's a pass pawn. So it's two knights against the rook, but the knights are very awkwardly placed. They are, getting in each other's way, and that's not the way you want to use the knights. Usually knights are best used if they're not defending each other. So here we have king back to g8, and interestingly here Grischuk is already below 3 minutes, so where Alireza has some 17 minutes on the clock. He plays g3, here already below 2 minutes. Again, you could go for some rook to e6 action, but it doesn't really do all that much. For example, king f7, you can play this, but it's basically a draw offering. We're going to capture on b3, and now you can win the two knights, but still you're up a pawn. This is a dead draw. So instead, after g3, we have knight to f5 here, and now king to g2. We have knight f to d4. Now Alireza basically offers a draw. Again, he offers the two knights for the pawn, and there doesn't seem to be anything all that much better, because now if you don't capture the knight, the knight is just in the center of the board. It's a very strong piece. Even though the knights are still defending each other, you kind of have to capture it. This is there's really no other way for you to make progress with white. So here he goes for it. Rook captures on d4. We have knight captures on d4, rook captures, and rook captures on b3. And we have this endgame that's basically a dead draw, and rook to d7. So okay, now the white rook is very active. Alireza's king can't approach deeper into the position, but he still continues playing. Of course, he's not just going to draw this. He's up a pawn, but also this is a team event, and board 4 is losing for Team Russia. Maxime Lagarde is beating Andrei Esipenko, and of course Grischuk has to try to make something out of this position. So here we have h5 by Alireza, rook to d5, and now just g6. We have rook to d7, and now king to f8. So not much to be done here. Of course, this is a complete draw. G4, we have captures, rook to e3. Now comes f3. We're going to try and make some progress with our king. Rook to b4, king to h4, and now rook to b5. So not allowing the king deeper into the position. If you allow this, then it could be very ugly. So king goes back. We have rook to b4, and now f4. So trying to do some work. Rook b3 check, king to f2. Now rook a3, cutting the king off from the third rank. Now comes rook to d5. We have king to f7, and now rook to e5. We have king to f6, rook e3, offering a rook trade. Of course, we cannot trade rooks because then the endgame is winning for white. So rook a4, now king f3, rook back to a1, and now rook to b3. So now we're gonna deliver some checks. Rook to f1 check, king to e3, rook to e1 check, king f2. Esipenko is still losing, so Grischuk has to keep playing. We have rook to e7 and king to g3. We have rook to a7 and now rook to b5. So of course, again, we're gonna try to get our king into the game. Rook to a3 check, king to h4, and now rook back to a7. And rook to b6 check. So we won the g5 square for our king. King to g7, now comes rook to e6. Of course, if you try king g5, Alireza will just push you back. Rook a5 check, and now we either repeat the position or you play f5, and this is again a very well-known draw. So instead, we have rook to e6, still waiting to see what Alireza will do. King f7, we have rook to d6, and now king back to g7. Of course, Alireza can be only happy with a draw. Rook to d3, and now king to f6. We have king g3, rook b7, king to f3, and now rook to e7. We have rook d5, king to f7, rook d6, king g7, rook to c6, and king to f7. So just making some moves. Rook c4, king to f6, rook to e4, and rook to a7. We have rook to d4. If you're checked, you can go to e4. So rook to e7, and now rook to d3. King f7, rook to a3, king to f6, and now king to g3. King f7, king h4, rook b7, and now king to g5. And here, if you play rook to b5 check here, Grischuk even creates a little trap. If you deliver a check here, then king h6 is now winning for white. There's no way for you to prevent losing here. You want to stop rook a7, so you might play rook to b7. But now we're going to play rook a4, and after black wastes a move, we're going to play g5, and after he wastes another move, we're of course just going to play rook to a6. And now we're going to play check, pick up the pawn, and just win the game. So there is the possibility of losing this for Alireza. King to g7, of course, is played. Alireza doesn't go for this. Rook a5, we have rook to c7, and now rook to a6. We have rook to c5 check, and now we've tried everything we can. f5 is played, g captures, pawn captures, and now rook to c7. So of course Grischuk will still test if Alireza will draw this. Rook to g6 check, king to f7, and now rook to h6. He has to try everything as this is a team event and Russia is losing. So here we have king to g7, f6 check, king to g8, and now king to g6. But now it seems like the situation is not all that great for black. There are many ways you can draw this, and the coolest one is the one that Alireza goes for, and that's rook to g7 with check. So now the rook cannot be captured. If you capture the rook, then it's just stalemate. So he goes back, king to f5. We have rook to a7, and now comes king back to g6, but now again rook to g7 check, and here Sasha captured on g7, and he was in this position on move 86 that, the players drew the game as Alireza has been stalemated. No 2800 for Alireza just yet, but he does not lose any rating because officially Grischuk is still higher rated than Alireza. He's some 2773 and Alireza is 2770. It's just that Alireza won so much rating in the live ratings, which gets updated every month, but he just got so much rating this month that it still hasn't been updated. It will be updated on the 1st of December. So nothing really changes here. No change in ratings. Alireza will get his chance tomorrow again to clear that 2800 mark. But here, facing Alexander Grischuk with the black pieces, well, you've seen what this means and how hard it was. Maybe Grischuk had a couple of moments where he could have played a little bit better, but that's a big if. That's just an engine's recommendation at a certain depth, and who knows? Of course, Grischuk operates at a much deeper depth, so we will not doubt Sasha at any point on this channel. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. There were many traps in the game, but no one fell for any of them. But here you can see just how dangerous this can be. This rook to b8 move is very rare, and of course Alireza prepared something to surprise Grischuk with, but obviously there's a good reason it's very rare. Maybe it's not very good, and against a former 2800 player like Grischuk, that will not fly. So yeah, once again, hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank Micah Kennedy, Konstantinos Lampridis, Rod Hill, Tudor Sharp, and David Kimura for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of this very nice tournament, checking up on your wonderful suggestions, and whatever else happens in the chess world. The World Chess Championship is starting in a few days. See you soon.